Welcome to the People's Report, news for the left, hosted by Solidarity TV. Today is Wednesday, October 8th, 2025. Joining me this evening are Riley and Austin. Would you use Chinese bone glue? What is ICE doing in our local police departments? Does Saudi Arabia have your best gaming interests in mind? Did you give your personal information to Discord? And did it get leaked? What is going on in Madagascar right now? Have you committed a thought crime? Has that set you up to become a violent criminal? Should the Hudson River be radioactive? Do you rent? Do you think that's right? Palestine. What is going on with the new ceasefire, and what does it imply about the future? These topics and more will be covered in tonight's episode of the People's Report. Timestamps are in the episode description. Apple removes ICE tracking apps after pressure by Trump administration. October 3rd, 2025, via Reuters. Apple said on Thursday that it had removed ICE Block and other similar ICE tracking apps from its App Store after it was contacted by President Donald Trump's administration in a rare instance of apps being taken down due to a U.S. federal government demand. Alphabet's Google also removed similar apps on Thursday for policy violations, but the company said it was not approached by the Justice Department before taking the action. Based on information we've received from law enforcement about the safety risks associated with ICE Block, we have removed it and similar apps from the App Store, Apple said in an emailed statement. Fox Business first reported the app's removal by Apple on Thursday. The Justice Department later confirmed that it had contacted Apple to pull the app and that the company complied. Google said its policies prohibit apps with a high risk of abuse. ICE Block was never available on Google's Play Store. Quote, ICE Block is designed to put ICE agents at risk just for doing their jobs, and violence against law enforcement is an intolerable red line that cannot be crossed, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi said in a statement. Joshua Aaron, the Texas-based creator of ICE Block, disputed that characterization and criticized Apple's decision. Quote, I am incredibly disappointed by Apple's actions today. Capitulating to an authoritarian regime is never the right move, Aaron told Reuters. Now, even launching a website would likely be met with takedowns, he said, adding that his legal team will decide on the next steps. Bondi has previously argued that Aaron is not protected under the Constitution and that they are looking at prosecuting him, warning him to watch out. Civilian surveillance of federal immigration agents has grown more assertive since Trump returned to office, with activists saying they aim to protect their communities from aggressive ICE enforcement. In cities such as Washington, residents also rely on encrypted chats to share enforcement updates, though how often apps like ICE Block actually alerted neighbors remains unclear. 6 legal experts have told Reuters that surveillance of ICE is largely protected under the U.S. Constitution, as long as the activists don't interfere with that work. Courts have long held that recording law enforcement activities in public areas is legal.
So the funny part about the Apple and the ICE article was that the FBI said that it was a red line that couldn't be crossed because it endangered ICE agents. And, it just gets to the whole core of whose safety is the state there to protect. And this collaboration of the state with the tech sector is always an important story I think we should cover and we should look at and think very deeply upon. I always lean toward the perspective that seeming disagreements between individual large tech companies or the tech sector as a whole, seeming disagreements between them and the government are always more like a surface level thing. They might be tactical, but in the deepest sense, I think that they represent an overlapping shared class interests, and that they're just disagreeing over how to manage the system of control and the system of extraction and imperialism. But yeah, okay, so I guess that's a victory for ICE having this ICE tracker app removed from the Apple Store.
Yeah, pretty ridiculous. I mean, like you said, it's a red line. Like the U.S. government gives a shit about red lines.
They don't like red lines.
Yeah. Every line that can be crossed repeatedly gets crossed by ICE all the time. And they attacked an apartment complex in Chicago, playing out their military fantasies. They're just trying to snatch people off the streets, and I don't even mean that in the traditional way in which ICE has been used for the last 20 years. I mean, quite literally, as someone's walking down the street and then they just chase them. So, but ICE is going to be in danger if people know where they are. So.
Well, it's strange too with us looking at this mythical red line with an app when it's the U.S. government itself that is actually illegally engaged in illegal deportations. It is the U.S. government that started Alligator Alcatraz. It is the U.S. government that is complicit in more than just this genocide. Like where's the red line for the government? The red line always seems to be drawn around the people who don't get a voice for liberation or for any other thing other than going to work. So it's just remarkable that we're being told that this app is worse than what they are doing to the public.
Yeah, and it gets to that kind of, I don't know, you might call it dialectic, like when it comes to the surveillance state and the repressive systems of the state. Extreme intrusion into our lives, total surveillance of our lives, total intrusion of our privacy. But the corporate system and the state has total, anti-transparency, total secrecy. You know what I mean? It's just like a total imbalance of power there, which is not really a very novel point, but it's an important point worth repeating.
Yeah. The fact that the tech companies get to determine what is or isn't a threat to ICE, or I guess more technically, because they receive notice from the government, that the government can just tell people, hey, your app, we don't like that, and then they just take it down.
Yep. Well, I've also noticed too that, a lot of like non-violent, non-aggressive, even just people posting a colored fist emoji gets flagged as being offensive language. But these imperialists get to jump on all of these tech platforms like Meta or X or what have you, and say literal genocidal freaking rhetoric that is in violation of both national and international law. And these tech companies also have all these bot farms that they're investing millions of dollars into to spread their disinformation. So we have all of these tech companies that are in violation of the Genocide Convention itself.
It also sets a precedent potentially for like how should activists, how should organizers use, not use, operate within, operate outside of tech, operate outside of apps, like what is it? What does this portend for like activists potentially wanting to develop a new kind of app that might help people share information about law enforcement or share information about resources or community, activism and stuff. It might be something to reflect upon.
Chinese-made bone glue fixes fractures in just 3 minutes with one injection. September 28, 2025, The New York Post. Scientists in China have developed a revolutionary new bone glue that can heal fractures, which could traditionally take months to heal in a matter of minutes. According to a report, bone product O2 was developed by a Chinese research team, which sought to fix orthopedic injuries that would generally require months of downtime and invasive surgeries that often include metal plate insertions, the Global Times reported. Lin Shanfang, Associate Chief Orthopedic Surgeon at Sir Runrun Shaw Hospital in Hangzhou, said the adhesive can achieve precise fixation in a matter of minutes, even in blood-rich environments. The glue treatment comes in the form of a single injection and will bond shattered bone fragments in just 3 minutes, according to that report. In one trial case, a patient with a wrist fracture received one injection via a mere 3-centimeter incision and was healed in just 3 minutes, Cho Sun Daily reported. Surgery to repair the wrist would have required a metal plate and screws that would require second surgery the following year to remove, the outlet reported. After a 3-month follow-up checkup, the patient's fracture had fully healed without complications, that report claimed. Researchers said they were inspired by oysters, namely the mollusk's ability to stick to underwater surfaces that are difficult for traditional adhesives to manage, Interesting Engineering reported. Unlike ordinary glues, this bioglue secreted by oysters forms pressure and erosion-resistant bonds in moist, salty, wet, and constantly moving conditions, that outlet explained. The creators of Bone 2 further stated that the substance demonstrated a maximum bonding force of over 400 pounds. Bone O2 can also be naturally absorbed by the body as the bone heals, eliminating the need for a second surgery to remove implants, according to the substance's creators. Initial tests also indicate that using the bone glue produces fewer infections than metal plate procedures.
I think when a lot of people hear the nation of China, their mind goes to many different things, but very seldom does it actually go to the advancements that China is doing. And their new bone injection is so revolutionary that it knocks months off of healing. 3 minutes injection, maybe a little bit of a splint and some physical therapy, and you're out the front door. I feel that this is a remarkable feat of socialist medicine.
It's incredible, and certainly anyone who's broken a bone, or honestly, I hate to say it, but anyone who's had to miss work or been put onto disability for some time or faced immense financial hardship as a result of these injuries, this would be a godsend for them. I mean, I hate to be the guy who's like, well, hey, they get to go back to work sooner, like I'm some sort of coal baron. But, in this country, not working means you and your family starve or go homeless. So these kind of quick fixes that seem to be, at this stage, medically valuable and long-lasting are fantastic. Not to mention, just no one wants to be in bed with a broken leg for like 6 months or get an infection, even if you do have a really good doctor doing stuff.
There are so many possibilities for collaboration and just learning that are obscured and potentially destroyed by imperialism, by our provocative war stance against China, is what internationally, geopolitically, but then just domestically, the level of misinformation and just straight up racism against China, just this word that represents this great unknown and this great villain. This is just one small example. There's so much that we could learn, that we could have access to, that is available, that trade wars and, actual, militaristic provocations that we are carrying out in the South China Seas and, other things are, preventing us from having an actual interchange of culture and interchange of science and education and medicine. And this is just a really good example.
Yeah, one of the remarkable things that I have studied with the Chinese healthcare system, it doesn't matter what part of China you're in, whether you're in the deep, most rural part of China or in somewhere like Beijing or Chongqing. You have unlimited access to medical care. They have whole villages that are very, very primitive in nature, that have doctors that come and do X-rays, do traditional Chinese medicine. And while the course of medicine does take a little longer to heal, it is a more whole heal. It's more complete from the ground up. And I think moving into the direction where healthcare is as simple as getting an injection to fix some things, I think is definitely moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I'd be willing to try skateboarding if I knew that falling and injuring myself would result in a 20-minute hospital or a doctor's visit. Or, how many kids break their limbs doing all kinds of cool stuff.
Now, one of the things, too, you got to think about the people that get into car crashes or break every single bone in their body because they fall from something. Fractured and destroyed bones can lacerate organs, vital arteries. So being able to get in there quick and set the bone and fill it with this paste or whatever it is, and then minutes, and you're almost as good as new.
Could also be available in conflict zones,
Very much so.
When's the last time the United States has developed anything that revolutionary in medicine? I don't know, maybe recently and I just didn't notice.
I can't think of a certain one. We seem to have billions invested into bone-shattering bombs, but nothing in terms of actually fixing people.
And we keep cutting funding to these programs because if the way, let's say that this were something being developed in the United States, the way that the Trump administration and Doge would have looked at it, they would have seen on paper, we're giving $500,000 to this project to study mollusk glue. And they would have immediately canceled it and just tossed out the money. Canceled the program just like they have been and all these other things. And then they would have posted it online, deriding the study as some kind of foolish waste of money that only stupid people and nerds would like. And then this would never happen. We would never be able to develop this bone glue because we've determined that the people studying the source of it or the inspiration for it were wasting their time and wasting tax dollars. Of course, the U.S. government never wastes its tax dollars.
No, never.
So incredible what the Chinese system's been able to do, especially in direct contrast with ours.
It's remarkable what you can change if you give a shit.
Yeah.
It really is.
County jails operating as detention centers, a gray zone that has expanded under Trump, October 25th, 2025, via El País. More than 500 local facilities across the country are cooperating with the government's agenda, despite not being officially recognized to hold migrants. Across the United States, local law enforcement agencies have partnered with the Trump administration in its campaigns of mass detentions and deportations at a record pace. These partnerships, also known as the 287G agreements, grant local law enforcement institutions the power to both hold and transport people to and from ICE-approved detention facilities while they, in turn, benefit financially. Since June, the number of 287G agreements has increased from 649 to over 1,000 in 40 states, according to a press release from September 27th. However, the official figure does not include all the agreements the immigration agency has reached with local entities. By comparing the list of detention centers on the immigration agency's website with an index of county jails and sheriff offices that have 287G agreements, El País found that, nationwide, there are more than 500 local facilities that are not recognized as formal detention centers on the ICE website, even though they operate as such. ICE does not release a complete list of detention facilities that it uses, said Dr. Susan Long, co-founder of the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, an organization that makes immigration data available to the public. The agency suppresses quite a large number of them under a variety of guises, the expert added. There are multiple types of agreements that local and county law enforcement agencies can enter into with ICE, Long explained. The 287G is just one of them, a program created in 1996 and revived en masse by the Trump administration, which redirects resources and space in local taxpayer-funded facilities to detain immigrants. Many of these detainees come from other states or have no criminal record. Detention center contracts are slightly different from a 287G agreements, which deputize local officers to assist with immigration detention. Under some 287G agreements, a law enforcement officer can take someone into custody, alert ICE, and temporarily keep the individual there until immigration agents arrive. While 287G gives officers more detention flexibility and allows them to take people into custody if they think that person is undocumented, regardless of whether they have committed a crime, a detention center contract formalizes the per diem payments that county jails receive for holding ICE detainees, and designate the amount of time jails can retain these prisoners. As a result, there are 500 county institutions with 287G agreements with ICE that are not recognized as formal detention centers, though local officers have the ability to bring immigrants into custody there. I'm not really surprised that we're subcontracting local law enforcement for ICE and for detaining and holding of so-called illegal immigrants. This is exactly why so many people join law enforcement in the first place, is to do this kind of stuff. But I can't help but wonder how much of it is a straight up lack of manpower and resources versus how much they want to muddy the waters and keep these people off the books, keep detainees, keep deportees away from the public eye and away from scrutiny by not holding them at ICE facilities, by not sending in ICE agents. Because even with we have, the ICE block or whatever, if a community is looking out for each other and keeping an eye on ICE, they might not blink twice at a police vehicle rolling down the street. They would at one of ICE's armored cars.
I feel like this is just such a big scoop. I'm pretty certain, as I understand it, this is like an exclusive to El País, the Spanish newspaper. They found that like over 500 facilities, at least 500 facilities at the local level. County detention centers are cooperating with ICE, are part of this racist crackdown. So that's just a huge story, first of all. That's enormous. It makes you wonder, what else don't we know? I mean, these are secret agreements. This is a secret weaponization of basically community level, ground level, day-to-day level infrastructure, of the country to be engaged in this nationwide authoritarian crackdown. That's just a huge story, first of all. Second of all, again, it raises the issue of what else on a local level is being mobilized and engaged in this apparatus. A historical kind of parallel that this made me think of was during the Red Scare after the First World War. A lot of the worst syndicalist laws against Bolsheviks and Reds and all this stuff were operated largely at the local level. So the Red Scare kind of persisted throughout the 20s because of local legislation that operated throughout the country. I think that this understandably can feed into many communities' fears of the presence of ICE in their community. And we know that ICE has basically disguised himself in civilian clothing before. So yeah, I mean, this is fucked, basically. I would call it fucked.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something that should be public domain. Whoever they arrest, there needs to be a database of searchable people. There needs to be a way for the families to be able to get in touch with their loved ones that have been arrested, because let's be perfectly real here. To be caught or found guilty of an immigration crime is a civil offense. It is not criminal. And so you're basically saying that people who have an equivalency of a charge to debt is now sitting in county prisons, demonstrably cruel ICE facilities where people have been reported dead and getting beaten. So there's little to no transparency that is going on whatsoever at all. And the longer that they keep playing this anti-transparency game, the more the public is going to want answers. And the more the secrets continue, the worse this is going to get.
What were the agreements called?
It was the 287G.
Yeah, I'm curious. Let's say there's a version of the plot where some of the worst aspects of what's happening blows over, right? There's some kind of change at higher levels, but what if some of those agreements stay in place? If we've seen anything since at least, September 11th, 2001, it's that once these precedents are put in place, they remain in place. And whether it's the authorization for the use of force, which is technically like we're still going after 9/11 people for 24 years, if it's the National Defense Authorization Act, that just so many things are just jammed into there, the surveillance, all of this stuff, and now these kinds of agreements might persist beyond Trump. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people, especially, some liberals and progressives don't understand, is that this is deeper than Trump. This is like a systemic thing. And, this infrastructure will be implemented during this regime. But what we'll be revealing is if, for example, if a Democrat comes in 2028, will they put any effort into uplifting this machinery, or will they leave it in place? My suspicion and my pessimism is that they would leave it in place.
I think two key things that are part of this is, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, the 287G program is volunteer. The government doesn't reach out to, small little police departments. They apply. So I think that on one hand, this really shows how deep this problem is, because like we said, I believe last week, the mass anti-immigrant movement campaign, whatever you want to call it, militarization, is expressly a softer ethnic cleansing. And I say softer just because Israel's doing a pretty big one right now. We're not there yet. And just the perversion of what America means, but it's a perversion of our local communities on a very deep personal level. These departments and these people choosing to volunteer to participate in this program. Classic, some of those who work forces are the same that burn crosses. This has never not been true. Right. And this is what's going on. And the other thing is that they get away with far more abuses because there's no oversight, and they might not have to follow the regulations that actual long-term holding facilities do, like having doctors on hand. If people are getting randomly grabbed in the street and chucked into a local prison, whether or not their medical needs are going to be taken care of is at the discretion of the local law enforcement. And when the local law enforcement is volunteering to cleanse their communities of Hispanic people, which they can do because they can now discriminate based on appearance, based on race, ethnicity, based on language and occupation, we can't really expect that our neighbors are going to be taken care of whatsoever. Any of our neighbors at any point by law enforcement that are going to volunteer to be Gestapo.
I think it's important to illustrate, too, the definition of ethnic cleansing, which is the forced expulsion of an ethnic or religious group from a society. And that's exactly what's going on here, the same way as it's going on in Gaza and the West Bank.
Update on a security incident involving third-party customer service. October 3rd, 2025, via Discord press release. What happened? An unauthorized party targeted our third-party customer support services to access user data, with a view to extort a financial ransom from Discord. What data was involved? The data that may have been impacted was related to our customer service system. This may include name, Discord username, email, and other contact details if provided to Discord customer support. Limited billing information, such as payment type, the last 4 digits of your credit card, and purchase history if associated with your account, IP addresses, messages with our customer service agents, limited corporate data, training materials, internal presentations. The unauthorized party also gained access to a small number of government ID images, such as driver's license and passports, from users who had appealed an age determination. If your ID may have been accessed, that will be specified in the email you receive. What data was not involved? Full credit card numbers or CCV codes, messages or activity on Discord beyond what users may have discussed with customer support, passwords or authentication data. What are we doing about this? Discord has and will continue to take all appropriate steps in response to the situation. As standard, we will continue to frequently audit our third-party systems to ensure they meet our security and privacy standards. In addition, we have notified relevant data protection authorities, proactively engaged with law enforcement to investigate this attack, reviewed our threat detective systems and security controls for third-party support providers. Taking next steps, looking ahead, we recommend impacted users stay alert when receiving messages or other communication that may seem suspicious. We have service agents on hand to answer questions and provide additional support. We take our responsibility to protect your personal data seriously and understand the inconvenience and concern this may cause.
Our security with our messaging and how we communicate is constantly being under threat, as reported with our report on Discord. Unfortunately, there is no platform that is safe, and Discord is extremely popular with the left. It is also extremely popular with the right. It is also extremely popular with people who do any kind of community building, any sort of political movement, any sort of religious movement. So there's a lot of benefit that Discord is bringing to people, and Discord again is being hacked. Now, to my understanding, like messages between individuals and stuff like that are not being shared. But as these hacks continue and they keep cracking farther and farther in, how much longer until basically all messaging apps are obsolete from their risk of being hacked?
A lot of the data that's been leaked is personal information involving payment, which, first of all, why are you paying for Discord? It's a free service. It's a free service. You're paying for digital outfits and, knickknacks on your computer screen that most people don't ever see. I mean, yeah, you get to post a little GIF react instead of my non-GIF one. Like, whatever. I don't know. You should not be paying for Discord. And that's just, that's not a moral thing, just personal judgment. Like, come on, man. Pay for something better. I don't know. Send money to Gaza with the $10 a month or whatever. But also people's government IDs that they have uploaded for age verification. First of all, I will again say, why are you uploading your government ID to a private corporation? But that is not the point. The point is that for social media, a lot of these places have started to crack down on age verification stuff. So that way children are not exposed to adult content. Now, ostensibly, that would be, I have to assume, violence and swearing, largely sexual content, but really it is these companies covering their ass to avoid getting in trouble for distributing this content to people who are underage. And really, it shrinks the space that children used to have online to almost nothingness. And I don't trust any of these websites that are doing age verification via uploading your government ID, because then what's the point of having any online anonymity or having any online presence if it's directly connected to your government status?
For me, it almost feels like we're developing this social credit score that our nation has accused China of having. If they can link everything to your ID card, what's to stop them from saying that, oh, you need to insert your ID card into the computer for us to know your age and who you are, for us to link your activity to you, and then we know everything you research, everything you look at, everything you watch, and it's literally your whole life.
Yeah. The only thing that's stopping that is that tech companies don't want to pay for the little mag reader in the device. But, and yeah, that's exactly it. If your government identity is attached to an online persona, whether it be goofing around on World of Warcraft or RuneScape back in the day, or being on Discord now to play Call of Duty with your friends, frankly, that's not the government's business. And having to attach your identity to that just makes breaches like this, I feel, not even a risk from a political sense, just from a private sense. People's private lives are not public business. I also feel like it is a step towards identifying enemies of the state. And right now, those enemies of the state are, sure, socialists and communists, left-wing agitators in general, even progressives to an extent, but largely trans individuals whose names and online identity or online presentation may differ from their government documents and their in-person identity for whatever reason. They may not feel comfortable coming out. They may not be, it might not be safe for them, especially if it's young people. And it just creates the opportunity for that information and that private part of one's expression, especially if they want to keep it private, it allows it to get out. I also think it's a discriminatory against poor people.
I think so, yeah. Very much so.
You can't play video games online without an ID card. When video games are already too expensive, and it's hard to get an ID card, especially if you don't have your documents. If you're married and you can't get your name changed, you have to go through all those documents in order to get that. Now you can't be online. It's bullshit. Video gamer Electronic Arts to be bought in largest ever private equity buyout, valued at $55 billion. October 1st, 2025, via AP News. Electronic Arts, the maker of video games like Madden NFL, Battlefield, and The Sims, is being acquired by an investor group including Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund in the largest private equity-funded buyout in history. The investors, who also include a firm managed by Jared Kushner, President Donald Trump's son-in-law, and the private equity firm Silver Lake Partners, valued the deal at $55 billion. The commitment to the massive deal is in line with recent activity in the gaming sector by the Saudi fund, wrote Andrew Mayork of Raymond James. Saudi PIF has been a very active player in the video gaming market since 2022, taking minority stakes in most scaled public video gaming publishers, and also outright purchases of companies like ESL, Faceit, and Scopely, he wrote. The PIF has made its intentions to scale its gaming arm, Savvy Games Group, clear, and the EA deal would represent the biggest such move to date by some distance. PIF is also a minority investor in Nintendo. The deal needs approval from national security regulators on the Committee for Foreign Investment, given that the Saudis are involved, but there are plenty of reasons to expect it will go through. Not only does Trump's son-in-law want to do the deal, but the president could also be inclined to look favorably on any Saudi investment, because he has benefited directly from their spending. His family business has been paid by Saudi-backed LIV Golf for hosting its tournaments at his club, starting at a difficult time years ago when the PGA Tour pulled out of events at the same venues following the January 6th siege of the Capitol by Trump supporters in 2021. The U.S. agency leading the Foreign Investment Committee, the Treasury Department, did not immediately respond to a request for comment about the potential conflicts of interest. If the transaction closes as anticipated, it will end EA's 36-year history as a publicly traded company. CEO Andrew Wilson has led the company since 2013, and he will remain in that role, the firm said Monday. Electronic Arts would be taken private, and its headquarters would remain in Redwood City, California. Kushner, the CEO of Affinity Partners, said, quote, "I've admired EA's ability to create iconic, lasting experiences, and as someone who grew up playing their games and now enjoys them with his kids, I couldn't be more excited about what's ahead." The size of the video game market has attracted large investors in recent years. One of EA's biggest rivals, Activision Blizzard, was snapped up by technology powerhouse Microsoft for nearly $69 billion in 2023, while the competition from mobile video game makers such as Epic Games has intensified. I, for one, am a little disappointed, more than a little disappointed. I do not like the KSA. I don't like EA games either. They suck. What they did to Battlefront 2 was unspeakable. But the fact that a corrupt government, and that's saying something as an American, such as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, getting involved directly in video games, getting involved directly in any of our entertainment, rubs me the wrong way. I don't like when the U.S. does it. I live here. It has to happen. I mean, I pay taxes when I buy a video game. The government's involved. But the KSA is just not someone that I want to be supporting financially, that I want to be involved with whatsoever. And having played so many hours of Battlefield 1, I'm really disappointed.
Yeah, it seems that the government is trying to take too many steps to be even in our digital entertainment, like video games. They're trying to do everything that they can to install this technical feudalist whatever regime that they're so desperately after. You can't even buy a game anymore online without the risk of losing your right to possess the copy for whatever TOS that they want to say. And I feel that video games should be apolitical. I don't think that there should be this political dynamic in these video games because of all the division that it is causing. And then we have governments like Saudi Arabia that is working with members of our government to purchase our entertainment. It feels like we're hearkening back to a day of Romanesque sort of livability, and I don't like that.
I view it as an example of what's sometimes called nation branding, or sometimes cultural diplomacy. I believe Saudi Arabia just recently hosted or is about to host a giant comedy festival.
It was like a week ago.
A week ago it just happened.
Yeah.
Huge comedy festival, like some of the biggest names in American stand-up comedy. I think there were obviously different opinions about that. But regardless, it seems as if, again, Saudi Arabia is trying to attract capital, trying to attract a certain kind of presence on the global stage. And, with your idea, with Yanis Varoufakis' idea of like techno-feudalism, we might be seeing like, not totally rival, but like kind of rival, like clusters of tech companies and nation states kind of working together to establish like a ideological sphere of influence. We've seen a lot with Israel. Netanyahu recently had like a meeting with social media influencers, and that's something that's kind of ongoing. Obviously, the United States is probably the global capital of tech and that kind of data culture. And I think that this is like a huge thing to get into, but one of the things that is behind like the shimmering screen of data culture is Middle Eastern terror and autocracy controlled by the United States and its axis of oppression. And I, again, view it as a form of nation branding and capital accumulation.
Yeah, and the KSA does not necessarily have a great reputation in the Western world. It is nominally our ally. We did go to war to defend it back in 1990, and that led to a whole bunch of other problems. But it's not very well regarded. So paying its way into American life, just like Qatar did, paying its way into European life through sponsoring all those football teams, all those soccer teams, is just a way to garner goodwill to encourage the American public, or at least this is how I feel, to encourage the American public to overlook its greatest offenses, like it being an outdated monarchy that utilizes its natural resources not to build for the future, but to accumulate as much capital as possible amongst the ultra ruling class and screw everybody else. That's why they have these bullshit programs like Neom, or however it's pronounced. Their mega city with all these shopping malls that they're building in the middle of the desert and have to evict all of the indigenous Bedouins. It's just wealth for wealth's sake in order to accumulate power in the short term and to make sure that we don't call them out on it. Of course, what they're also using that wealth for is slavery, the oppression of the people there, the exploitation of women, the exploitation of labor in general, multiple invasions of Yemen over and over and over again, which always fail because, good luck, bud. But what they're going to do is just constantly keep spending this money that you pay when you buy Battlefield 6 or whatever to drop bombs in Yemen and to send more mercenaries into war zones in the Middle East in order to maximize their wealth and influence. What to know about the Gen Z protests roiling countries across the globe. October 2nd, 2025, via Time.com. Young people are taking to the streets en masse in cities around the world in an effort to fight against perceived government corruption, staging contentious protests that have sparked violent clashes with authorities and, at times, turned deadly. Spanning countries in Africa, Asia, and South America in recent weeks, the so-called Gen Z protests have been motivated by a variety of grievances directed at government leadership. Here's how the recent youth-led protests have played out so far, and the impacts we are already seeing. Morocco. Anti-government protests fueled by anger over Morocco pouring money into preparations for the 2030 World Cup instead of public services have raged in the country for nearly a week. Police opened fires at protesters in L'Aquila, a town near the country's central coast, and what authorities later described as a legitimate self-defense to prevent protesters from storming a police building and seizing weapons. The incident resulted in 2 deaths, according to the police statement. A group called Gen Z 212 launched a protest movement last week with social media posts demanding better schooling and healthcare. Beginning in Rabat, the capital, and Casablanca, the demonstrations have spread across several cities. Stadiums are here, but where are the hospitals? Was one of the chants yelled by the protesters. More than 400 people have been arrested during the protests, according to Rachid al-Khalifi, a spokesperson for the Moroccan Interior Ministry. Meanwhile, 260 police officers and 20 protesters have been injured. 40 police officers and police cars and private cars have been set ablaze, Prime Minister Anouk announced that he was ready for dialogue and discussion within institutions and public spaces in a televised address, but protesters have demanded he step down. The protests come as more than a third of young people in Morocco under the age of 25 are unemployed, according to the country's statistics agency. Madagascar. Madagascar President Andry Rajoelina dissolved his government on Monday, following youth-led protests over water and power access that have resulted in 22 deaths and over 100 injuries, according to the United Nations. We acknowledge and apologize if members of the government have not carried out the task assigned to them, Rajoelina said in a state broadcast. I understand the anger, the sadness, and the difficulties caused by power cuts and water supply problems. I heard the call, I felt the suffering, I understood the impact on daily life. Demonstrators, however, have demanded Rajoelina's abdication and for the termination of the Election Commission and the country's top court. Organizers suspended protests in the capital, citing concerns over the health of demonstrators, while other parts of the country have carried on the anti-government movement. Hundreds marched in Toliara, south of the capital, calling for Rajoelina to step down, while in Diego Suarez, north of the capital, similar protests continued. The country's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has rejected the casualty numbers from the UN, claiming the figures were based on rumors and misinformation. Urban poverty is a key issue in Madagascar, with a reported 75% of the country's residents affected by poverty as of 2022. Peru. Protesters clashed with police in Lima, the Peruvian capital, over the weekend as young demonstrators, joined by bus and taxi drivers, marched over growing economic insecurity. The protest began on September 20th, following the passage of a reform measure that will require young people to pay into a private pension fund. Taxi and bus drivers, meanwhile, say gangs are extorting them for money and that the government is not doing enough to intervene. Accusations of corruption, economic insecurity, and crime have also contributed to fierce government opposition and mass demonstrations. Some placards held by protesters read, We demand a life without fear." Many Peruvians have called for President Dina Boluarte, whose approval ratings have been in the single digits for months, to leave office. Boluarte faced fierce opposition in 2022, shortly after assuming the presidency, when 10 people were reportedly killed during anti-government protests after former President Pedro Castillo was impeached for rebellion, following his attempt to oust Congress and rule by decree. Boluarte, vice president at the time, was quickly sworn in, while dozens died in protests that followed in southern Peru. A report from the Institute of Peruvian Studies over the summer showed Boluarte's approval rating was at 2.5%, and Congress at 3%. Nepal. After youth-led protests against corruption and a ban on major social media platforms toppled Nepal's government in early September, the leader of the demonstrations announced last week that he will run in the country's March general election. In an interview with Al Jazeera, Sudan Gurung said he will create a, quote, movement for change and build a people's government rather than a traditional political party. Nepal's Prime Minister, Sharma Oli, resigned from his position after the anti-government protests erupted across the country, leaving at least 72 people dead and hundreds wounded, most of them in the capital, Kathmandu. The protests were ignited after a social media ban blocked 26 platforms for users in Nepal. In the following days, thousands of demonstrators took to the streets, and the parliament building on Kathmandu was set on fire, along with the homes of high-ranking politicians.
So young people are, getting busy throughout the world, which is always good. I thought that lead off was done very well. And, I think that there's a lot of inspiring developments with that. And I think it goes to show how many of the struggles that we see internationally are interlinked, and how, on the one hand, we should respect the nuances of each place. And I think that it would be, I shouldn't come at what's happening in Madagascar, for example, with my own preferences for my politics, the way that I want it, blah, 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 all this stuff, idealize what like a revolutionary should be in Madagascar, whatever. That being said, there are so many identical, universal forms of injustice that's what's so cool, man. So for example, in science, multiple scientists cannot talk to each other, and they can just be over here and they can find the same results. Mm-hmm. It's not made up. It just is in nature. It just is true, right? And I think that multiple revolutionaries can just be over here doing their stuff, and then they're like, hey, this is really messed up. Hey, this is really messed up. And they identify the same systems and of oppression, the same hierarchies, and they use some of the same, techniques of organization to get together and to challenge the system. And of course, today with the way that communication is interlinked, they are communicating with one another, and they are seeing themselves as part of a global movement. I think that's something that we in the United States need to learn from. We need to like emulate that and embody that and reproduce that, because that's really, really inspiring.
Yeah. And I think it's good also that we get to focus on some of these countries that are often overlooked. Like, when's the last time you thought about the political situation in Madagascar? I don't know if I ever did. Outside of mentions of it in Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. He talks a bit about the colonial situation in Madagascar, which that's about the extent of it that I know. So I have no idea what's happened there after 1958. So bringing this to our attention, particularly as Westerners, is really good because it allows us to start asking questions like, what is going on in Madagascar? What is this situation? And then we can go or we should go and find those answers and bring them to the table. Madagascar, Nepal. I mean, Nepal is almost never discussed in in Asian international relations, despite the fact that it borders both India and China. Mm-hmm. And Peru comes up a little bit more, I think, in American circles, probably due to proximity. And Morocco is pretty much also forgotten about and then just collected in the assorted things of what Americans think the Middle East is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the youth of our world have woken up, they're angry, and they're ready for revolution. They're not playing around. We have numerous revolutions that have broken out across the global south, and they have done very well in taking their rights for themselves. And this isn't just limited to Asian countries. We just recently saw where Italy threw down in general strike and protest in support of the Palestinian people. These flotillas are going to lead to a lot more revolutionary moments. The people have seen what people power is all about. These flotillas showed the world that people power is here to change the game, and that these governments of ours, they've been complicit. They've been complicit in genocide since the indigenous, going into the Holocaust and coming into now. It's the same old story, and the youth have risen. And they're going to continue to rise as they are in this country and around the world.
Yeah. I admit some trepidation about this moment, though, because we had a very similar one in 2010, 2011 with the Arab Spring. Mm-hmm. And that was almost immediately seized upon by the US and NATO and allies to destroy rival countries and rival powers. What we did to Libya is, I don't even have the words for it. What we did to Libya following the Arab Spring, what we did to Syria, Iraq, and even in Lebanon, and in all of these countries that had these popular risings in response to legitimate grievances, don't get me wrong, that were then exploited and taken advantage of by Western powers in order to install US-backed dictators like in Egypt, mm-hmm. to completely obliterate anything resembling a state in Libya and destroying the people. The continued stresses in Lebanon, the establishment of ISIS and a 13-year civil war in Syria that ultimately ended with Donald Trump shaking the leader of ISIS's hand, recognizing him as the leader of Syria after, 13, 15 years of war. Mm-hmm. And so, what next? I think the good news, the good part of this is that the United States especially under Trump, is no longer interested in subtlety. We're no longer interested in influencing except at the barrel of a gun. But there might be more cool heads involved that we don't get to see a lot. Proposed Ohio amendments would protect LGBTQ rights amid legislative push, October 3rd, 2025, via Cleveland.com. A slate of bills in the GOP-led Ohio legislature shows why getting 2 amendments enshrining equal rights protections on the ballot is so important, said Lise Regula, a co-chair of Ohio Equal Rights. Among the bills that could be taken up this fall are several that would regulate conduct and lifestyle of LGBTQ adults, particularly those who are transgender, as well as more bills to govern trans children. The fight for legal equality through combating bad bills and the fight for legal equality by ensuring our rights are recognized in our state constitution and more accessible to individuals of all means are both incredibly important, Regula said. The bad legislative bills that are continuing to pull the pressure on the LGBTQ community, they simply show even more reason why we need to have these protections at the state level, where we have better control over how our policy in Ohio gets played out. The group is gathering signatures in a bid to put 2 amendments on the ballot in 2026. One would add new equal rights protections to the Ohio Constitution, covering a wide range of protected classes including race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, and more. The other would extend those equal rights protections to marriage, removing existing language from a currently unenforceable same-sex marriage ban. The decision by the Ohio Ballot Board in July to split the original proposal into 2 separate questions necessitates gathering signatures for both questions. To place both constitutional amendments on the November 2026 ballot, Ohio Equal Rights must collect signatures from registered Ohio voters equal to at least 10% of the total votes cast in the most recent gubernatorial election, a massive organizational effort requiring over 400,000 valid signatures for each amendment. Last legislative session, Ohio lawmakers passed several GOP-backed bills that predominantly targeted transgender youth, including banning gender-affirming care for minors, restricting transgender women and girls' participation on sports teams, and restricting transgender individuals' use of restrooms, locker rooms, changing rooms, and shower rooms in Ohio schools. This session, there are other bills in the hopper that would continue to regulate the lives of transgender children, including a bill that would require parents to give permission before schools use a student's chosen name or pronouns, and another that removed the ability for Ohio children aged 14 years or older to receive mental health treatment in certain circumstances without parental consent. While not specific to LGBTQ youth, advocates warn that the legislation could have far-reaching consequences for vulnerable minors. Great news coming out of Ohio, of all places. Birthplace of J.D. Vance, if I'm not mistaken. And this spits right in his face in his ideas of gender rules and regulations, if you will. The people of Ohio rallying to try to pass protections for LGBTQ individuals, members of our community, our neighbors. And yeah, it looks like it's going to be a hard-fought battle. I mean, you need a total of 800,000 signatures, but I have to assume that anyone who's going to sign for one is going to sign for the other. It's really only 400,000 people. That's a decent-sized city. I don't know what the population of like Columbus is, but
yeah, it's nice to see that people are actually finally starting to step up and protect our rights. For the last couple years, really, we've just slowly been seeing our rights slowly evaporate. More and more policy being passed against transgender people, against the LGBT. We saw the taking away of affirmative action, the whole 9 yards. Everything that they can possibly do to cause us harm, and for what? We're human fucking beings. There's why. Okay, so you don't believe a trans person is a real this or a real that, but we're still a real fucking person. So it's really cathartic to see that Ohio is stepping up and taking care of business.
yeah, they have a reputation to protect. Ohio's been slandered from anything from the kids making jokes to its basic perpetual redness for the last couple elections. And I'm glad to see that the people are doing something about it. And like you said, yeah, the attacks on trans people are ridiculous. Of course, I don't have to tell you this. It's also that way the government can look like it's doing something without doing anything to actually address the material conditions of the people. People are hungry. The people are broke. People don't have jobs. People don't have health care. But they're like, hey, I'm just like the people in Morocco and Madagascar are like, hey, what the hell is going on? And if the government can say, oh, don't worry, we're taking care of things by just beating up on the most defenseless people in the country, they're going to look like they're doing something. And then, after all the trans people are gone, after all the Hispanic people are gone, after all the black people are gone, after all the non-Christians are gone, we're not going to have food. We're not going to have health care. And so it's smoke and mirrors, but it's violent smoke and mirrors. So I'm glad that people are shattering the mirrors and fanning away the smoke.
One of the most profound things that I read in my recent past was from a spiritual book. Actually, it had to do with kind of spiritual practices and meditation and stuff. And it said something like a weak foundation that crumbles easily isn't worth defending, something like that, or ideas built up that crumble easily when they're challenged are not ideas worth protecting. And the whole fragility of heteronormativity and the fragility of binary logic when it comes to ironclad conceptions of male and female in a society. It's just so funny because the pretense is tough, you know what I mean? It's toughness, male toughness, and yet some of these guys are just so sensitive when it comes to the existence of people outside of their worldview. But it does get to how ideologically insane we are beneath the surface when it comes to gender and sexuality, and how dependent we are upon gendered ideas for our everyday interactions, just relationships, the way that a morning meeting at work can go, or a conversation. There's little subtle micro relationships that are gendered. And from that perspective, trans people are the ultimate villain, because it just breaks their worldview. They're what is this? And they just don't understand. Their heart isn't big enough. So this is a victory to have an expansion of the human heart.
It's also important to add too, the conservative crowd seems to have this very glossy-eyed understanding of, trans health or LGBT issues and whatnot, and they always classify us as weak, but also super soldiers. Right. We're so dainty and we can't do anything, but oh my God, if we play in women's sports, we're gonna take everything, which is not happening. I think it's important to remember that the more this government decides to clamp down on the people, the Stonewall riot is gonna get a version 2.0.
Good.
The more that they keep pushing the people and backing the people into a wall because we want to live our lives in a way that is good for us. It doesn't have to be good for you. It's just good for us. What we do, how we live, we ain't harming anybody. We're not offending anybody. And if our presence offends you, I would like to reenact a political clip of a Japanese congressperson saying, "Hey, fuck you. I'm not playing around with it." So it is good that Ohio is stepping up because maybe others will follow. So that way we can get back to a sense of normalcy. And pardon the cussing.
The trans people in sports debate pisses me off to no end. I don't know if you guys did. I played sports in high school. And I was involved in athletics in college. I did tennis. It was one of the ones that I was involved in. And tennis is sex segregated. We have men and women's tennis for mostly bullshit reasons. But when I was in high school, the girls' tennis team had this girl on it, who was probably 5 feet tall, maybe 90 pounds if you put her in a snowsuit and dunked her in the lake. Mm-hmm. And she would kick my ass every single time we played. And I wasn't bad. I was good at tennis. I was on the starting lineup 3 years in a row. She'd kick my ass every single time. There is no amount of testosterone or estrogen or anything else either of us could have taken that would have changed that outcome. I go onto the court, she kicks my ass. So the idea that, trans people are either cheating at sports or they have an unnatural advantage. This isn't true. If this girl could beat me every single time, whether or not I was or was not a man was not going to change that. Whether or not she was or was not a man was not going to change that. She was better, and by a lot.
Well, see, and here's the thing, too, about taking estrogen. It decreases your muscle mass. It decreases your endurance. it decreases all of these paladin-like stats that guys are typically used to having. So once that estrogen starts getting into your systems, it changes everything. And there's literally no way that people who have a decreasing muscle mass is doing better than somebody that has a six-pack abs, biceps for days, and are dominating in their category. So sports is supposed to be the end-all, be-all of merit-based anything. And they still cannot let merit be merit. Why not let trans people compete and show our merit, show that we can play, and just shut the fuck up and let us be?
Yeah. Especially for children in youth sports. You're telling me that you're really going to throw a fit over softball, over baseball in middle school? Mm-hmm. If it's ridiculous. No one that I knew was going to go professional. I wouldn't even say there's an argument if someone was. It's high school. Come on. We're doing it for athletics. Trump classifies anti-capitalism as a political pre-crime, early October 2025 via Jacobin. Donald Trump's designation of Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization last week was a perfect encapsulation of both the administration's authoritarianism and its clownishness. A far more serious and disturbing move around the same time attracted far less notice. Trump signed a national security policy memorandum called Countering Domestic Terrorism and Organized Political Violence, known as NSPM 7. Such national security directives are far less common than executive orders. As journalist Ken Klippenstein reports, NPSM 7 directs a new national strategy to disrupt any individual or groups that foment political violence, including before they result in political violence. Indicators of future political violence listed in the report are anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-Christianity, support for the overthrow of the United States government, extremism on migration, extremism on race, extremism on gender, hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family, hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on religion, and hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on morality. This is, at the very least, a directive for surveillance and tracking of clearly constitutionally protected speech. Targets would fall under suspicion for simply holding any one of a list of standard left-wing beliefs, subjectively branded as extremism, supposedly predisposing them to violence. Even militant atheism is being classified as a kind of pre-crime, presumptively linked to political violence. This is almost cartoonishly authoritarian. And unlike the executive order declaring a non-existent organization to belong to a non-existent legal category, it's all too easy to see the path from this directive to surveilling and squelching speech the administration doesn't like, and how private employers, too, could take it as a cue to crack down on employees with views in the prescribed categories. What might be less obvious is how absurd this core premise is here. The directive's premise is wildly inaccurate. People who hold the views that Trump might label as extreme are not more likely to commit political violence than anyone else. If anything, the opposite is true. In all of these cases, left-wing analysis directs people to think in terms of structures of power, rather than blaming individual bad actors. It's particularly absurd to treat anti-capitalism and similar structural analysis of power relations as indicators of violence. Trotsky and Marx were perfectly clear. Anti-capitalist structural analysis leads to the inevitable conclusion that acts of political terror or one-off violence should be dissuaded. At a moment of escalating politically motivated lone wolf attacks, the conservatives who rail against radical Marxist indoctrination on college campuses frankly should hope that this becomes more than just a hallucination.
This administration is so scared of adversarial ideas. So much to the point that this administration has took it upon itself to pass an executive order that criminalizes being against fascism, which is mind-numbing because of the war that we fought during World War II. Does anybody want to remind the Trump administration that the valiant Americans that went to kick Adolf Hitler in the nuts were anti-fascists? Or those that were in the Soviet Union that fought back against Hitler and smashed the other side, anti-fascists. Every single person that marched in that war and carried a rifle for the liberation of humanity were anti-fascists. To say that having anti-capitalist viewpoints is somehow a pre-crime, like we're in a Tom Cruise movie called The Minority Report, where if you just think a certain way, it is a precondition to crime. Like we don't have a bunch of Republicans who are using a whitewashed version of Christianity to cause rampant harm, death, and destruction across the United States and the world. But it's illegal to be anti that. So it's so unbelievably stupid that this is what's going on. To be fascist is somehow a moral, patriotic duty, knowing that our nation is complicit in the Holocaust. It is complicit in the slaughter of indigenous people. It is complicit in damn near every single illegally wrong action that has taken place militarily since World War II. We haven't even won a war since World War II. We want to blame every single other person for being somehow anti-fascist as being somehow worse than fascism itself. It is so ridiculous.
And just let me read off this list real quick again of what we've got here. As indicators of future political violence: anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-Christianity, support for the overthrow of the U.S. government, extremism on migration, and a bunch of these are extremism on, like who defines that? Extremism on migration, on race, on gender, hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family, religion, or morality.
I mean, the people in power of the U.S. government are maybe the most anti-Christian people. They are not
right there, yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. They are not loving their neighbor.
Nope.
They are not seeing the same orb of love in one another's heart and treating another like an interconnected whole, which is the essence of Christ, who was a Jew, his message. You know what I mean? Like it's just like so insane. First of all, anti-American. Also, getting back to some of the other stories we were talking about, like if you think about all the targeted groups, right? And maybe like unifying them. So we have immigrants that are targeted, anti-capitalists that are targeted, trans people and queers that are targeted, so on and so forth. There is solidarity in being targeted by the state. You know, this is some, and again, with the 2024 election, with like, you know, Michigan, for example, you know, Muslims and Arab Americans and especially Palestinians in particular, you are now alienating an entire group of people that are energized and, you know, pulled forward by young people and by, you know, movements and organizers. That's one thought, is a potential for more solidarity. The other thought is, as you know, the article kind of pointed out, like the cartoonishness of this all. And on the one hand, do they overplay their hand and put out into the public forum messaging that gets back to, you know, 2011 with the 99% and the 1%, but pushes it even further into the mass consciousness? Is this an educational moment? Alternatively, on the other hand, does this have a chilling effect? And does this make, for example, AOC type people further bow down to the capitalist machine and you know, refrain themselves from even engaging in like, you know, like middle of the road, you know, critiques of our system? So there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. It's insane. It is thought crime. It's out of control. But again, this stuff has been put in place for a longer time than just Trump. I don't say that to protect Trump. I say that to identify the deeper structural genesis of all this. Yeah,
and looking at it further and more deeply, we have income inequality that is as bad as the French Revolution. We are not in a good position economically. So to even think that if you can't pay your rent, or you are struggling to afford your groceries, or if you can't afford your premium for your health insurance, or you get denied the health care you need to survive, and you criticize this, you're committing a crime? That is so unbelievably psychotic. to say that if you suffer in the system we impose on you, that to extract everything from you and you complain about it, you're committing a crime.
Well, it's not so much that you're committing a crime, but that this means that you are on a path towards violence. You are predisposed. Having these beliefs predisposes you to a violent action.
Which is mind-numbing, because I see a lot of Christian nationalists that have the same mentality, that are saying death, 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 death to every single thing that I don't like, because of what their religion that they are whitewashing to create is telling them. When every other person who practices Christianity knows that Jesus Christ was a Palestinian and loved everybody. But of course, they don't want to acknowledge that, because they want to be the Roman Empire in the story of Christianity.
Literally the opposite.
Not the fucking disciples that changed the world.
They are the Pharisees and they are Pontius Pilate. Real quick, it's also such a tacit admission of the problem. It's like, okay, look at the context, like you were saying with the inequality and the problems, and it's like, you can't talk about the problem. That's like, oh my God, I can't think of an analogy, but imagine like going to the doctor with like a gunshot wound and it's like, hey, what's the problem? But you can't use the word blood. Like, you can't, you know what I mean? It's like, you can't describe the nature of the wound. So that's just crazy.
One last thing I'll point out about this also is that I halfway agree with this. People who have expressed extremism on migration, people who have expressed extremist views about race or gender, that does sound pretty. Yeah, it does sound like an ideology predisposed to violence. Mm-hmm. But what I consider to be extremism on race is the Ku Klux Klan, the Proud Boys, ICE, not, I don't know, people who think black people should have rights.
But aren't Democrats also a capitalist party?
Yeah.
So for the Republicans to oppose another capitalist party, they are in fact anti-capitalist. So we can make these fucking connections all day. And at the end of the day, we can easily look at this criminalizing of Antifa thing and spit on it in disrespect.
Yeah. Kash Patel fires FBI agent trainee for displaying gay pride flag, October 2nd via MSNBC. FBI Director Kash Patel on Wednesday fired an agent in training for displaying a gay pride flag on his desk while appointed to a field office in California last year, according to 3 people familiar with the matter. The trainee, who previously worked as an FBI support specialist in Los Angeles, received a letter dated October 1st and signed by Patel, claiming he had displayed an improper political message in the workplace during his assignment in California under President Joe Biden, according to a copy of the letter shared with MSNBC. The letter cited President Donald Trump's Article 2 powers under the Constitution to dismiss federal agency career personnel, a justification used in several recent firings at the Department of Justice and FBI. The terminations are currently being challenged in several lawsuits. Quote, "After reviewing the facts and circumstances and considering your probationary status, I have determined that you exercised poor judgment with an inappropriate display of political signage in your work area during your previous assignment in the Los Angeles field office," Patel wrote, without referencing the flag. The FBI did not immediately respond to a request for comment about the story. MSNBC was unable to reach the fired trainee for comment and therefore is not identifying him. The termination over the pride flag was first reported by CNN. The agent trainee, who had most recently been assigned to the FBI Academy in Quantico, won an Attorney General's Award in 2022 in recognition of his work, according to a Justice Department news release. News of the trainee's firing spurred some agents in the FBI's Washington field office to scour their workstations and social media accounts for signs or comments, anything that could be viewed as offensive to Trump, his top appointees, and MAGA supporters, according to one person familiar with the reaction within the government. FBI agents and Justice Department prosecutors warned one another ahead of Trump's inauguration to be careful about displaying information revealing their sexual orientation or support for LGBTQ rights. After the inauguration, FBI agents warned colleagues that they had heard new pro-Trump appointees installed at the FBI were combing through internal employee files to find lists that identified employees as LGBTQ. DOJ Pride, a resource group at the Department of Justice, shut down in late January, less than 10 days after Trump signed an executive order seeking to root out all diversity, equity, and inclusion measures from the federal government. The group ceased to operate effective immediately, DOJ Pride's board wrote in an email sent to members at the time. I'm no fan of the FBI, not the least of which because as the federal police force, they are involved in all the exact same bullshit that our local police departments do, but on a greater level, arguably with perhaps less scrutiny. Not to mention they were the spearhead of a lot of internal anti-socialist, anti-left, anti-communist violence in the United States. They helped kill Fred Hampton. That's just off the top of my head, one of a million, which I don't have time to get into. I also don't think people should be fired for being gay.
No.
Or for supporting gay rights. Arguably, if you don't, I see that as more of a cause to get fired, but I don't think people should be fired willy-nilly in a country where being fired means you can't eat anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if somebody is going to get fired from a job, it might as well be for something like, taking somebody's human rights by chance, right, Kash Patel? But, if we're going to look at this from the bigger perspective, and I'm not in any way defending the fucking federal pigs, not by a fucking long shot, because of their hands with the IDF and ICE. And for those that are following at home, ICE and IDF are only different by two numerical spaces. So we are looking at this gender violence thing, this ideological predisposition for violence, and we're seeing Kash Patel literally do exactly what this Minority Report-esque thing that they're trying to do is trying to prevent. So we are being led with the utmost double standard. What they say they're doing and what they're actually doing, completely opposite.
Yeah, it's like an ideological purification of the system. It's happened in the early Cold War with loyalty tests and anti-communist purges. Not good.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying not good.
Yeah, the fact that, or I should say the suggestion, because I guess the article did not determine whether or not it was happening, but the fact, I said it again, the FBI, the possibility of the FBI going through personnel files in order to determine who may or may not have sympathies towards queer rights is not as shocking as it should be, but it's still deeply offensive. Oh, yeah. And this is even if we're going to drink the American Kool-Aid, the FBI's job is to ostensibly protect and serve the American people. And if you're doing purges of the FBI in order to get rid of people who might have sympathies for a marginalized group that you've already made averse towards hostility against, what does that say about what comes next?
Well, so we can easily just take a look at the history of the FBI and CIA. Our three-letter alphabet soup organizations got their start oppressing the labor movement, tracking down people escaping from slavery, tracking down people who were communists or socialists or any hint of red. Let's also not forget the Lavender Scare that directly coincided with the Red Scare under the same McCarthy, all at the same time. These organizations formed from the Pinkertons. And the Pinkertons, if anybody has forgotten, recently, I'd say within the last maybe year or two, decided to deploy and knock down somebody's door for legally purchasing Magic the Gathering cards that were previously unreleased. So if the Pinkertons still exist today that inspired the FBI and CIA, obviously these organizations are not on the side of the people, they are on the side of empire and corporations.
It's morally offensive to me that the Pinkertons are still allowed to exist.
Facts. They were outlawed from federal use with one sentence, and they're still allowed to be contracts with the government. They're owned by Securitas, which is also owned by another paramilitary overseas contracting company. So obviously, these organizations are invested in the wholesale death, destruction, and slaughter of innocent people. Full stop.
And if the law enforcement brigade that is supposed to be that carries out American orders against the public, which is arguably what the FBI does, and they're getting rid of people who have sympathies towards large sections of the American public, I feel like I feel like I don't need to explain that one.
It's like if you get on the FBI watch list thing and go and take a look at what they consider to be anything that gets you onto a watch list, ironically, it's everything that requires having empathy to do.
Just while we're talking about private securities, Pinkertons, and all these aspects, the existence and maintenance and perpetuation of these institutions, which is like a deep vested interest, actually literally of global capitalism, connects with Israel, all that shit. Blah, blah, blah. It requires the perpetual identification of enemies and of others. And this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years, blah, 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 blah. But it's just relevant to say, like, there's always going to be this institutionalized incentive to identify people, because then there's processing them and setting up these facilities and selling, software recognition shit. There's so much money to be made in policing and controlling people. And, this is part of that.
And now that we're in the dramatic decline of the American empire, and believe me, it is a roller coaster, the more things get out of control, the more this government is going to start cannibalizing its own, like the proverbial Ouroboros.
More billionaire bunkers and
they're just going to
facilities.
start chewing on their own tail more and more until they suffocate themselves.
Let's hope this gentleman in the FBI who's been recently fired, finds a good job where he's not hurting people, and maybe this will radicalize him to, take a good stand against the evil empire. One last thing, definitely one more line of connection between the FBI and the IDF: can't get gay married. $45,000 gallons of radioactive water to be dumped into Hudson River from Indian Point nuclear plant, October 2nd, 2025, via New York Post. Roughly 45,000 gallons of radioactive water from a defunct plant north of New York City will be discharged into the Hudson River after a federal court ruling struck down a state environmental law. U.S. District Judge Kenneth Karras sided with company Holtec International over New York State in a ruling issued last week that reversed the 2023 Save the Hudson law, which sought to prevent the company from muddying the Hudson's waters. Holtec sued the Empire State last year, arguing that only the federal government had the right to regulate discharge of the Indian Point plant's nuclear waste, which amounted to the 45,000-gallon sum, the New York Times reported. Judge Karras agreed, writing in his decision that the 2023 law categorically precludes Holtec from utilizing a federally accepted method of disposal. The company further argued that Indian Point had routinely made similar discharges while operating for over 5 decades in the downstate power plant. Holtec praised the ruling and assured worried New Yorkers that the radioactive dumping would be conducted according to federal regulations. We'll continue to decommission the Indian Point site in an environmentally responsible manner, working with local state and federal stakeholders, the company said in a statement reported by Reuters. Indian Point, which sits on the Hudson River about 35 miles north of Manhattan, was closed in 2021 after years of public outcry from the local community over environmental concerns. Despite Governor Kathy Hochul's celebration and signing of the Save the Hudson law, she slammed the closure of Indian Point as short-sighted, while announcing plans for a new nuclear facility. Let's be honest, in doing that, we turned off 1/4 of New York City's power and it was almost all clean energy, Hochul said at a June 23rd news conference. Overnight, without an alternative, we've had to burn more fuel. More fossil fuels have been burned. Greenhouse emissions are up in downstate New York because of that, the governor added. Holtec has a seemingly similar outlook, toying with the idea of reopening Indian Point to meet surging power demands, Bloomberg News reported on September 10th. Most of the interest has come at the federal level, Patrick O'Brien, director for government affairs at Holtec, told the outlet. It'll just take time and money and political will. A rep for Hochul's office told the outlet at the time the administration had no plans to reopen Indian Point, and was instead planning to go through with the plant's total decommission. Water from nuclear power plants is known to have a mild amount of radioactivity, in the form of tritium, which poses a small risk of contamination, according to the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
I'm pretty sure everybody's familiar with the famous Hudson River. One of the remarkable things of years past was when a captain named Sully managed to land an airplane on the Hudson. And ever since the Trump administration has taken over this term, the Hudson River has become of sorts a Bermuda Triangle, with several aircraft crashing into the Hudson River, and now the Hudson River is radioactive.
And I think it's a really good point that Hochul makes about the fact that shutting down nuclear power plants increases reliance on fossil fuels, which in turn are going to, again, pollute the river through emissions and eventually water runoff. Nuclear energy is ridiculously clean. It's not as clean as solar or hydroelectric or a lot of these other green energy plants. But in terms of production and waste, it is unbelievably efficient and ridiculously clean. So shutting down nuclear power plants and then dumping their waste into the water, who is that helping?
I can't think of anything, because that radioactive waste is going to spread. It's going to affect the wildlife. People get food out of the Hudson River. Like, people who otherwise don't really have the money to afford basic groceries rely on the fish that they pull out of these waterways. The Hudson River goes right into the freaking ocean. And didn't all of this start because of this government shutdown? So because the government shuts down, all of a sudden, all of these EPA rules, all of these, let's protect our ecosystem rules gets thrown out the freaking window, so conservatives can be lazy pieces of shit and dump toxic waste into our waterways that supply food and life.
The owner of this plant who had closed it down sued the government because in 2023 they were banned from dumping the water into the Hudson. So they sued and they just won that lawsuit, and which the judge said, no, yeah, you can dump it in, allegedly because the levels of pollutants are within federal regulations. It's an acceptable amount of tritium to be added to the water.
Acceptable.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to bring up. I forget. I think it was a different article that I read that in, but I think it was an industry representative made that argument that essentially, like, no, it's cool. Like, we're polluting within the acceptable amount of radioactive waste within, which gets to a larger issue, right? Which is like, for the past, 250 years, something like that, of industrial capitalism. There's just this, at times explicit, but I think largely unconscious, sublimated, suppressed kind of like anti-social contract, basically, like anti-earth contract that's just like, yeah, you gotta crack some eggs to make an omelet. Like, you have to destroy Earth to energize it or something like that. That's kind of like the logic of the system that we have from an ecological perspective. And sometimes it takes absurd instances like this to string all these kinds of instances together to be like, what really is acceptable? Like, what really is, like, isn't that insane? Like an acceptable amount of an acceptable amount of pollution within, like, to set up state, corporate, industry agencies that kind of manage the desecration of the earth. You know what I mean? It's like your job to oversee, like, guys, let's have a nice, responsible rape of the earth, rather than like, let's actually have truly integrated forms of like human nature cooperation.
Well, it all goes back to the colonialization and the colonization of North America, in which the land gets transferred from relationship use into ownership and production use. And the colonists treated the land as conquest. It was something to pull from. And largely, this was because they were pulling from and shipping back, and then eventually just pulling from in order to produce. And I don't mean it that way in which it's good, but in the sense that this is what they were doing with it. And we still have this very colonialist mindset of our relationship to the land, this extractive and this imperialist relationship with it, in which it is a prize of conquest to be spent and not something to have a relationship with. And we can put this in contrast to, again, Yemen, in which the indigenous population overwhelmingly uses, or at least in Sana'a, overwhelmingly uses clean energy because it's self-sufficient, but it also isn't desecratory. The destruction of the olive trees in Palestine by the Israelis, which has led to so many wildfires by the non-native plants that replace them. It is because these people see the land as a commodity that they won and took through violence. And the Hudson River is no different. We took the Hudson River through violence, and it is our possession to use and to extract and to exploit until it's gone, and then we'll just go get another one.
Yeah, it really seems like this administration is just trying to set everything up to catastrophically fail when another party takes the Oval Office. So that way they can say, oh, look, they screwed it all up. But I mean, at the end of the day, all we got to do is honestly look towards China. They just developed a nuclear option that generated enough energy that mimicked the surface of the sun for 9 minutes. And yet, our country thinks it's a good idea to make our country great by turning the Hudson River into Chernobyl. It does not make sense. Our countries are not the same, and we see what real leadership looks like, and it's not in our Oval Office.
China weaponizes agricultural imports to target Trump and U.S. farmers. September 29, 2025, via Politico. 6 months after the president's Liberation Day tariffs and weeks from the November 10th White House cutoff for a trade pact between the two countries, U.S. soybean farmers are learning that China, long the predominant market for their product, doesn't need them anymore. China has not purchased any U.S. soybeans since May, according to the American Soybean Association. Beijing has pivoted to suppliers in Brazil and Argentina, logging huge orders for Latin American beans and leaving U.S. farmers in the cold and panicking. All agricultural exports to China were down 53% in the first 7 months of 2025, compared with the same period last year, according to the USDA data. The effective boycott of the U.S. soybean industry at the height of the September harvest season suggests more than just a tit-for-tat import curb. The Midwestern soybean-producing states of Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, and Indiana are a key political constituency for the GOP in the run-up to the congressional midterm elections next year. Powerful agricultural lobbying groups, traditionally Trump allies, have flooded the White House with complaints that the tariffs are responsible for China's snub of the U.S. soybean crop. A person close to the administration said it was ruffled and completely caught off guard by the outcry from soybean farmers warning of the potential for financial ruin. Amid the outcry from farmers, Trump announced Thursday that he plans to use tariff revenue for cash bailouts to farmers until the tariffs kick in to their benefit. That will require congressional approval, and aid likely won't reach farmers until early 2026. The longer-term outlook for a return to large-volume soybean sales to China looks equally grim. Beijing's distrust of the durability of Trump's administration trade pledges and Xi's drive for self-sufficiency to insulate his economy from foreign pressure may mean that U.S. farmers have lost access to the Chinese soybean market for the foreseeable future. Beijing also has geostrategic reasons to leave behind the U.S. soybean producers in favor of Latin American suppliers. China's sharp increase in purchases of Brazilian soybeans coincides with sky-high political tensions between Washington and Brazil. The Trump administration has hammered Brazil with 50% tariffs and imposed sanctions on Brazilian Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes in response to what Trump has called the politicized prosecution and conviction of Brazil's former president Jair Bolsonaro for a coup attempt in 2022. Trump considers Bolsonaro a political ally and described his prosecution as a terrible thing. Meanwhile, China has romanced Latin America in recent years with massive investments through its Belt and Road Initiative and international infrastructure investment, a $9 billion credit announced in May, a growing number of free trade deals with countries including Peru, Chile, and Costa Rica. It's a way to send a clear message that China has other friends in the world, especially in the global south, said Leland Lazarus, a former special assistant to the head of U.S. Southern Command. Now those countries are providing a safety valve for China and strengthening its negotiating position with the United States.
So it seems as if President Trump just fucked around and found out when it comes to the trade war that he has been escalating with China. This sets a precedent for essentially the U.S. Weaponizing trade and implementing incredibly nationalistic economic policies. This also sets a precedent for other countries establishing economic ties that are independent and basically go around the United States, and that's primarily going to be based in China. The one way of looking at it is it's a single global capitalist system and there are rivalries within it. The other way of looking at it is there are competing cores within the global economy, and there is geopolitical rivalry between the China bloc and the United States bloc. Anyway, this soybean story is a major story in it, and I think it's good to talk about.
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways of this, for me anyway, is that the farmers, and of course, needless to say, when we talk about farmers and soybean farmers, we're not talking about people who are growing soybeans, who are picking, you pick soybeans, I assume? Pick soybeans, harvest them, whatever. We're talking about people who own the land in which the soybeans are grown and own the soybeans as capital, not the stereotypically immigrant workers who go and actually do all the work. Those are farm laborers. Farmers, in this context, like the ones who are yelling at Trump now and who support Trump, are the big business guys who own acres and acres and acres, hectares, I think those are bigger, all this property, all this land on which this food is grown. And they're selling it as capital. So now they have too much food and not enough money. But of course, they're not going to actually get hurt by this. Their business interests will be hurt by this. Mm-hmm. So that's really important clarification, I think, for the context of this. But China hasn't bought soybeans from America since May. And that means all the soybeans being grown and harvested are just sitting around. In a civilized society, that food would be distributed to the hungry. So many people in America are food insecure. Mm-hmm. Children are food insecure. There are fights in local school districts, in small little school districts, over whether or not everybody should eat.
Didn't the U.S. just burn a stockpile of food?
I think so. So, what are we going to do with this excess food? Is the government going to buy it and distribute it to the needy? Tofu is good eating, made from soybeans. Soybeans are good eating, good, healthy, really good source of fiber.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I think protein too.
Very much so.
So all of this soy product, all this soy food, these soybeans, available to be eaten by the public, where are they going to go? And you already answered it. In the trash, in the burn heaps. It's like the famous passage in The Grapes of Wrath, which the hungry people see mountains and mountains of food burning because there's no one there to buy it, despite how the hungry people, because the hungry mouths don't have food to buy, or don't have money to buy food, or else they wouldn't be hungry anymore.
I think it's also important to illustrate here, too, that the U.S. on a number of occasions has had their ambassador to the UN raise their hand to vote that food is not considered a human right by the United States and its satellite state, Israel. So when we're looking at all of these tariffs, all this is a old white guy who is used to getting everything he wants, no longer getting what he wants, and he can't handle the reality that he's not the top dog in the yard. In fact, the new top dog is the new daddy, China. They are the global hegemonic power politically. They are the global hegemonic power now economically, and they're even pushing it militarily. There is nothing that our nation can do except let me find a better way to word this. Our nation has to humanize itself and find the humility to say, the old way is done. We can't just starve people to get our way anymore. So the more that Trump ratchets up these tariffs on China or any other country, whether it's on food imports or trucks or kitchen supplies or what have you, the exact opposite is happening, and the global community is going, it's no longer viable to do business with the United States. We're going to go with the country that actually owns the means of production, and we're going to get a cheaper rate. And the more this is happening, the larger BRICS is growing, and they're already covering about 60% of the global economy. And so if Trump really wants to keep on this bullheaded endeavor to oppose China in every way, shape, form, and fashion, and not saying, maybe I'm wrong, let's shake hands, we're gonna stay in this position where we're getting less and less food here, and we've got 330 million people that are counting on the food and the resources to be there, and these tariffs are ensuring that it's not.
I think it also goes to show the importance of food sovereignty. Mm-hmm. If Brazil and Argentina are pretty large countries, but if Brazil and Argentina didn't achieve food sovereignty, they wouldn't be able to export food. And that means that countries that can't rely on the United States anymore wouldn't have them as an alternative. Now, China would be able to get by. I don't know if the soybean production is a requirement for China to eat. Pretty sure they produce plenty of food on their own, just maybe there won't be enough soybeans to eat. And this also gives these countries an alternative, like you said, to the United States. Small country, they're not small, but relatively less powerful countries that would normally have to rely on the power of the U.S. empire or good relations with the U.S. empire can now bypass them and create meaningful relationships with China that aren't based on force or violence.
Agreed.
Rising tenant-led movement aims to bring down corporate landlords. September 13th, 2025 via truthout.org. Tenant union organizers from Kentucky, Minnesota, Montana, and New York share hopeful news from the growing movement. Across the U.S., tenant unions have been exploding in growth and visibility. Thousands of tenants, from Los Angeles to Kansas City, from Chicago to Connecticut, have unionized in recent years. This is a bottom-up, multiracial, working-class movement that's directly countering the catastrophe of the U.S. housing system and the power of landlords, with the collective power of tenants. The movement is knitting tenants together into a self-identified class across geography that is carrying out rent strikes, winning critical policy battles, and even shaping the heights of politics. It's a radical movement, connecting the dots between the housing system and racial capitalism, framing housing struggle as a class struggle, and critiquing the rent relation and commodified housing altogether. While far from a new thing, today's tenant movement is an expanding vanguard that's organizing to frontally challenge the nexus of financial and real estate capital at the heart of the corporate power structure. With its focus on confrontation, striking, collective self-organization, and its aim of empowering tenants to assert control over their housing and communities, the movement flouts the decorum of bourgeois and NGO politics to cultivate direct power and direct solutions for rank-and-file tenants. In 2024, several tenant unions came together to form the Tenant Union Confederation, founded with the goal of organizing tenants to wield power at a massive scale, to bargain for tenant protections, to disrupt the flow of capital to those who commodify our homes, to secure alternatives to the current housing market, to guarantee housing as a public good, and to establish tenants as a political class that cannot be ignored. Speaking of China, Mao was 100% right when it came to landlords, and I'm really glad to see other people in America are recognizing that and are really bringing together tenant power. The idea of renting is something that a lot of Americans don't ever question because it's so prevalent. And I think especially in American cities where people expect to have relatively small housing and especially in college places where they're expected to have small housing for short periods of time, it seems to make sense to them. But the very concept of having to pay somebody else a profit for you to be able to live in shelter is absurd. And yeah, sure, there's profit being generated when you're buying and selling homes. And the profit is primarily there, from the construction companies. They're generating profit from that, and that is one thing. But a continual profit by stealing someone's income for a house that they live in, that they, generally speaking, take care of, that they rely on to live, and you are stealing wealth from them for a house you cannot use, is obscene. And the entire landlord grift is so clearly wrong. We have Enlightenment philosophers like John Locke and who's that guy who's the father of capitalism or whatever they call him?
Adam Smith.
Yeah, Adam Smith talking about how landlords suck. And it's, again, just to be perfectly clear, it is hoarding housing from a needy public in order to create shortages of housing so that way you can maximize profit by leasing artificially limited amounts of housing back to a public who will die without it. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, most basic level of shelter. Without shelter, you die. And this is why renting is so abhorrent. This is why renting out is so abhorrent. People who do rent don't have a choice, usually speaking. But this is a huge problem. And just like the other problems of capital, in which necessary resources are being hoarded from the public and then trickled back to them to extract massive profit, even though those necessary items were created by the people in the first place, the answer is collective power and collective action.
Yes.
Joining together with your neighbors, making these tenant unions, and demanding from the landlords concessions with the implicit threat that if those concessions are not made, they will be taken by force.
I fully have the viewpoint that landlords are parasitic freeloaders that sell nothing more than their permission.
Yeah.
For me, looking at the phenomenon of rent, it's literally permission. There's just no other way around it. And so these landlords have, I would say, the deepest God complex out of all capitalists, because you're forking over sometimes $3,000 a month for somebody's permission. And of course they can go, oh, next month I'm gonna raise it higher. Oh, next month I'm just gonna kick you out. They go, oh, but you need to go through this and this attorney and this. Oh, I've got money, don't you worry about it. Literally, when you are renting from somebody, you are paying for somebody's mercy. And that's just not the American way. Not in a country where we are told that we have the right to life, to liberty, and to the pursuit of happiness. And the only way that we can fight back against the parasitic class of landlords is through a solid formation of tenant unions that are ready to mobilize and fight back against this concept. There are over 15 million open, vacant homes across the United States that are just sitting there waiting for somebody to pay for their permission to live there. We only have about less than 800,000 houseless people across the country. It would be really mundanely easy to say, well, we've got 15 million open homes. We've got this many people. Hey, let's get them into the home. Let's get them an avenue to find a job. Let's get them an avenue to get whatever they need, so that way the houseless has a chance at survival. When did this country lose its heading and devolve deeply into Nazism? It's so mind-numbing. People do not have to pay for their right to live. People do not need to pay for their right to eat. People do not need to pay for their right to have medical care. It's just the cancer of the system.
There's an economist and actually like a historian of economics and science called Philip Murawski. He's written a lot of cool stuff, and he has a critique of neoliberalism that essentially says, okay, under neoliberalism, the economy is viewed as an information processing system. And the model is like, information on goods and services are freely kind of moved around. And, this is a way in which free choices are provided for the rational consumer to essentially exercise their freedom on the market and so on and so forth. But again, it's this information processing system. But just while we're on the subject of like housing and like, real estate and just like being able to live in a place that's safe and like secure, like one measure of an information processing system might be like self-awareness, right? Or like, does it give information to the people it ostensibly serves in a way that makes them self-aware and able to like reflect upon their even recent past? And it's like, can you guys think of something that happened recently that involved housing and like finance? You know what I mean? And it's like, the 2008 crisis. So it's like, okay, well, here we are again, and we're in this sick situation with, housing and speculative finance and, artificial scarcity and the unhoused. And it's just really, really horrific. And it goes to show that when planning is controlled by the ruling class, when, economic policy is planned for profit rather than for social well-being, these are the kinds of contradictions you get, and it's bullshit.
Mm-hmm. And one last note on what renting actually involves. It is a tenant paying the landlord. But what it really is the tenant is paying the mortgage. The tenant is paying the utilities. The tenant is paying the upkeep. The tenant is paying for maintenance. The tenant is paying for the appliances, repair, and maintenance. And then, on top of all the costs of living that anybody who lives anywhere would have to pay, the tenant then has to pay an extra sum of money that just goes directly into the landlord's pocket, like you said, as permission to live there. It's a bribe that you're paying some scumbag
to not be homeless.
Yeah, to not be homeless. And yeah, to an extent, you could say, well, that's, everyone has to pay to live. But renting is you are paying to live, and then you are paying a parasite blood.
Literally. Your
work, the money that you already largely got cheated out of at work from your boss, the money that was the crumbs that your boss handed back to you after the labor you produced, after the value you produced at work. You then have to give a chunk of that as a gift to another person in exchange for them not using the state's monopoly on violence to make you homeless. And that's what renting is. Dropsite News reported on September 8th, the Israeli military is waging an all-out aerial assault concentrated on Gaza City, targeting dozens of high-rise towers in the heart of the city and reducing them to rubble. The destruction of residential buildings and tent encampments nearby is part of its stated operation to ethnically cleanse the entire area of the nearly 1 million Palestinians sheltering there and force them south. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the goals of the offensive were defeating the enemy and evacuating the population, omitting any mention of the freeing of the remaining Israeli hostages, which has been a constantly stated war aim until now, The Guardian reported. The IDF further defended its operations as targeting Hamas, and based on precise intelligence, air, and ground forces, we have to remember who we're dealing with here, and that is a group of people that have dedicated their lives to violence and barbarism, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said. And when you're confronting that hard reality, as much as we may wish there'd be sort of peaceful, diplomatic way to end it, and will continue to explore and be dedicated to it, we also have to be prepared for the possibility that that's not going to happen. While Rubio, Netanyahu, and others in the genocidal axis view their operation as a defense of civilization against barbarians, Hamas has called Israel's Gaza City offensive an unprecedented barbaric Zionist escalation, which violated all international norms and laws. The evidence, even from reports within mainstream Western press, appear to confirm Hamas's statement. They're not fighting Hamas. They're fighting all of us civilians, Gaza school teacher Montasar Beha told the New York Times as Israel ramped up its destruction of Gaza City in mid-September. Israel has created a mass exodus of Gazans, reported Le Monde. The Israeli army has systematically destroyed the urban infrastructure of Gaza's largest city. Towers, housing apartments, local institutions, schools, and mosques have been pulverized. Gaza, a city with millennia of history and home to 1 million people, one of the most densely populated places in the world, appears to be living its final moments. Fighter jets, drones, and explosive robots unleashed a massive bombardment that leveled entire neighborhoods. Gazans are now faced with an impossible dilemma: stay and risk immediate death, or leave and die a slow death with no guarantee of safety. The so-called humanitarian zone in the south, where Israelis were pushing people to flee, is also being targeted by the army. Tess Ingram, spokesperson for the UN Child Protection Agency UNICEF, said that it's inhumane to force children to flee one hellscape and end up in another. While Gaza-based political analyst and researcher Ahmed Al-Tanani, who was also forced to flee despite having cancer, stated that Israel's main objective is to strike at what Gaza represents, the only city still standing, with remaining economic and administrative value, despite its partial destruction. The occupying army seeks to erase even the idea of possible reconstruction. The world's silence means complicity in this plan. This is not a battle, reported the Electronic Intifada. Each armored vehicle carries enough explosives to obliterate everything within 100 meters, including homes, streets, and all that lie between. The tanks roam the streets like mechanized predators, forcing entire neighborhoods to flee in panic. Gaza City today is no longer a city, but a scene of mass death and day-by-day survival, reported Haaretz. Entire families who had nowhere to evacuate to just got out of their homes and started walking, without knowing where they were headed. Within minutes, our house turned into dust, said Abu Ahmed from the Tufa neighborhood. Not even a memory left, not a wall or a room. As Palestinians, we are used to being abandoned, Abu Walid, a Gaza City resident, told Haaretz. It has happened before, but we didn't expect that no one would step in to stop this daily destruction, not a single Arab or Muslim nation. Gaza is falling, and beyond solidarity, we are receiving nothing. Israeli journalist Amira Haas writes that what the IDF euphemistically calls the evacuation of civilians from Gaza City is accompanied by a relentless barrage of airstrikes, shellings, and explosions. Targets of Israel's terror include mosques, schools, multiple UN buildings, including clinics sheltering thousands of displaced people, what was left of the Islamic University of Gaza, Gazans sheltering in tents, waiting for aid, and entire families fleeing on foot and in cars. Israel targeted a vehicle carrying displaced Palestinians, including children, on the 16th of September, engulfing it in flames and killing everyone inside. Fear, fear, it's all fear, Maysar al-Adwan told CNN. Explosions over our heads all day was how Ahmad Abu-al-Had described Gaza, adding, "We are going from death to death." Meanwhile, the medical conditions for Palestinians continue to deteriorate under Israel's deliberate policy of genocidal destruction. Gaza is facing a new threat as diseases resistant to antibiotics spread across the devastated territory, reported The Guardian in mid-August. High levels of drug-resistant bacteria will mean longer and a more serious illness, a more rapid transmission of infectious diseases, and more deaths. Not only has Gaza's healthcare system been decimated, but sanitation systems have been destroyed, the disposal of garbage and solid waste has almost stopped, and hunger is widespread among the 2.3 million population, making many more vulnerable to infection. We don't even have space left in the morgue refrigerators, an Al-Shifa hospital director told Le Monde. Hospitals in Gaza symbolize life itself in the face of siege and war, Ayad al-Amawi, a Palestinian relief worker displaced in Deir al-Balah, central Gaza, told CNN. Destroying these beacons of hope is intended first and foremost to break the will of society, to push people into despair, and to rob them of their ability to endure. Raul Incertus, an emergency room doctor and anesthesiologist, who volunteered in 2 hospitals in Gaza from April to June, shared his disturbing memory of trucks or carts pulled by starving donkeys that entered the hospital with corpses piled up on their way to the morgue. Dr. Ali Tarawi, a doctor in central Gaza, has written, "My message to the world is simple. If we are left to burn in this hell alone, then humanity itself has already died. This world is no longer human, and the silence that allowed all of this will haunt you forever." Noor Khaled, journalist and successor of Anas al-Sharif, who, along with reporters for Reuters, Associated Press, and Al Jazeera, was murdered by Israel in late August, has made the harrowing decision to remain in Gaza to bear witness to the genocide, stating that after their deaths, something was born inside me that said that I have to complete the journey for which they sacrificed their lives. Taqwa Ahmed al-Wawi, writer and poet from Gaza, writes, "The occupation watches and controls us, yet I feel it is my duty as a friend to document this life, to tell the world we are here, we are not numbers, we have dreams, ambitions, beyond all limits, but the occupation insists on killing those dreams. That is why I am writing this, to record my friends' stories in the page. In Arabic, we often say, 'We are the dead who walk with living bodies.' Now I ask, why are we dying while we are still alive?" The human rights chief reporter Volker Turk declared, "It's important that the whole world screams for peace. But what kind of peace will prevail?" After Israel bombed a ceasefire negotiation in Doha, Qatar, on September 9th, it is becoming apparent that Israel is not only sabotaging the prospects for peace, but furthermore destabilizing America's Middle East imperial axis. The Wall Street Journal reported that Israel's attack on Qatar brought into focus a growing realization that Israel has made a strategic decision to secure itself through the force of arms, even at the expense of its diplomatic ties. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar all condemned the attack as a violation of international law. Beyond the immediate exchange of criticism, the region's wealthy Gulf nations are sorting through a newly scrambled geopolitical order and weighing whether to view Israel as a potential partner, a security risk, or both. The inter-imperial chaos and fracture is the backdrop to the recent so-called peace deal. The Independent reported on October 4th, overnight, Mr. Trump called on Israel to immediately stop bombing Gaza, saying Hamas was ready for lasting peace after the militant group accepted some elements of his 20-point peace plan, including the release of all remaining hostages held in Gaza. Despite President Trump's pleas to Israel to stop the killing in lieu of the supposed peace plan, Israel's bombing has continued. This suggests that peace plan represents not an end to the genocide, but rather a mere reorganization of the international machinery through which the genocide is conducted. The Washington Post reported on October 6th, the plan is short on details, but it calls for a phased withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, the disarmament of Hamas, and the formation of a committee of Palestinian technocrats to run the enclave's day-to-day affairs under the supervision of an international body. It also appears to take off the table the most controversial issue, based on an earlier proposal by Trump and Netanyahu, to forcibly displace Palestinians from the territory. Hamas's biggest concern is that once it hands over the remaining hostages, the Israelis will say they will not leave. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said no hostage release could take place if bombs are going off and active combat is occurring, while Israel released a statement claiming it retains the right to continue bombing, that is, actively sabotaging the so-called peace plan. As the Post reported, many Palestinians in Gaza report no meaningful change in the ferocity of Israel's onslaught. Nothing has changed since Hamas agreed to Trump's deal. If anything, the Israeli strikes have gotten worse, said Maisa Nasser, a 34-year-old mother of 2 in Gaza City. We face all kinds of weapons, artillery strikes, airstrikes, drones, and explosive vehicles. Bombing comes from every direction. We are exhausted. My heart can barely handle it. The Wall Street Journal reports that Arab governments are concerned the deal is so tough on Hamas and so weak on a path to a Palestinian state that they cannot sell it to their citizens. The journal also added that Israel is worried about it constraining its ability to intervene in the Gaza Strip. In other words, Israel wants to retain control over Gaza, including its ability to regularly mow the lawn by massacring Palestinians and decimating the possibility of a Palestinian state. As Israel ramped up its assault in Gaza City, Haaretz released a report showing that moral injuries were getting out of control and scarring the soul of the IDF. One soldier recounted that while in Beit Lahia, after one soldier shouted, "Terrorists," they turned the area into a killing zone. "We go into a frenzy and get on the Negev, a machine gun, right away, and start spraying, firing hundreds of bullets. We then charged forward, and I realized it was a mistake. There were no terrorists there. I saw the bodies of 2 children, maybe 8 or 10 years old. I have no idea. There was blood everywhere, lots of signs of gunfire. I knew it was all on me, that I did this. I wanted to throw up. After a few minutes, the company commander arrived and said coldly, as if he wasn't a human being, 'They entered an extermination zone. It's their fault. This is what war is like.' An Atal Brigade sniper shared, 'Every day we have the same mission, to secure the humanitarian aid in the northern Gaza Strip.' Accompanied by drones and armored forces, they set up a sniper position and watch while the trucks arrive and begin to unload their contents. Meanwhile, the residents try to move forward to get a good spot in line, but there's a line in front of them they don't notice. A line that, if they cross it, I can shoot them," Benny explains. "It's like a game of cat and mouse. Fire 50 to 60 bullets every day. I've stopped counting kills. I have no idea how many I've killed. A lot. Children." Another soldier said that during an operation in Gaza, soldiers in his platoon mistakenly killed a woman and her 2 children who had entered an arbitrary killing zone. They subsequently suffered from nightmares, insomnia, and they kept seeing those children. A culture of silence and conformity within the IDF ensures that suicides and discharges from duty for mental health reasons are suppressed, and, as one soldier put it, everything just went on as usual. Haaretz identified a broader context of traumatized IDF soldiers participating in more and more missions whose purpose no one really understands. An earlier report from August showed an increase in psychological strain among IDF soldiers, many of them so-called mercenary West Bank settlers. According to Haaretz, troops are almost exclusively focused on destruction of infrastructure in Gaza. One soldier told Haaretz he hadn't heard of a single incident where armed militants had approached troops in the area. According to him, the forces are mainly targeting suspects via drones and only afterwards try to verify the identities of the dead. The main activity of the forces appears to be building demolition. One soldier told Haaretz that they haven't attacked Hamas targets in recent weeks. More recently, an IDF sergeant major told the Washington Post that he felt this huge adrenaline, this feeling that you're really part of this big thing. According to the Post, the adrenaline rush continued into his Gaza deployment until the continuing bloodshed seemed aimless. At some point, he said, "You see, there is no mission." An IDF tank gunner told the Post that his experience in Gaza transformed him into something not 100% human. This genocide is not only dehumanizing IDF soldiers, it is dehumanizing all of us. But that is only because all of us, oppressed, oppressor, Palestine, America, are connected. Thus, while we all share in the dehumanizing horror of the U.S.-Israeli Holocaust, we also share in the empathy, courage, resistance, and sumud demonstrated by Palestine, the heart of the world.
All right, comrades. So following on the heels of our Palestine update, we actually have some breaking news on today, October 8th, 2025. Just within the past half hour, a ceasefire deal has been reached, which it is said will end the war, which the war is not just the past 2 years of conflict. The war is structural and blah, 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 as we know. But the current genocide is, it is being said that it may end. And Hamas has recently released a press release in which they say, after responsible and serious negotiations between the movement, Hamas, and the Palestinian resistance factions regarding President Trump's proposal in Sharm el-Sheikh with the goal of reaching an end to the genocide against our Palestinian people and the occupation's withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, bold letters, the Islamic resistance movement, Hamas, announces reaching an agreement stipulating an end to the war in Gaza, the occupation's withdrawal from it, the entry of aid, and a prisoner exchange. So those are the 4 key parts of it. End to the war, withdrawal of the occupation, entry of aid, and a prisoner exchange. A prisoner exchange of Palestinian prisoners being held by Israel. not just people who have been held in the past 2 years who've been scooped up, but longstanding Palestinian prisoners, including people who've gotten like life sentences.
Is there a timeline on when the hostages are going to be released from
Sunday.
Sunday?
Sunday. This is what's being said.
Okay.
All of the hostages will be released on Sunday, and it is.
And that's for the Palestinians and the Israelis, right?
That's what's being said so far. That's what's being said so far. So, they call upon all of the involved countries to implement the requirements. We affirm that our people's sacrifices will not be in vain, that we will remain faithful to our pledge, and we will not abandon our people's national rights to achieve freedom, independence, and self-determination. And that's reported by Reuters. And in a follow-up update, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for all sides to abide fully by terms of the Gaza Agreement. He said the UN would support its full implementation and scale up the delivery of aid to the enclave. I really hope that means that the UN would resume aid rather than the fucking Nazi, crusader, fucking GHF. All hostages must be released. So that's where we are now. And this follows from the update that we just heard, which basically follows, of course, 2 years of genocide, that we cannot pack all the details into a single report. But as the report covered, the conditions there are, disgusting and horrific. The Palestinians are being hunted like mice. The medical condition there is unsustainable. Infectious diseases are spreading, diseases that are preventable with just basic, human dignity level medical infrastructure. Doctors are reporting disturbing things like donkeys pulling in carts of dead bodies like it's the fucking bubonic plague, like it's some kind of Ingmar Bergman film or something. So it's really fucked up. We heard a lot of voices from Palestinians who are describing, what is going through them. We heard that Israel is actually destabilizing the imperial order controlled by the United States in the Middle East, and is, raising questions among America's Gulf allies, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, and it is reshuffling this system. And prior to Trump coming in, under President Biden, we had these Abraham Accords, which was essentially supposed to solidify and normalize the relations among U.S. allies in the region by burying the Palestinian cause. And it wasn't until October 7th, 2 years ago yesterday, that the courageous Palestinian resistance movement broke out of the concentration camp and forcefully put the issue of Palestinian rights and Palestinian humanity onto the global stage. And for everyone who doesn't like what happened on October 7th, it's like, we made October 7th happen by saying no other form of resistance but armed resistance worked. So we chose October 7th to happen.
Yeah, armed resistance is never the choice that the people make.
Yeah.
Armed resistance is always the only choice thrust upon the oppressed masses.
Yeah. So that's where we are 2 years ago. 2 years ago yesterday was October 7th. So that's why we had such a long segment on that, updating that. What are your thoughts?
I don't see this as something to celebrate. I see this as just an avenue to continue the genocide. The reason I say that is Israel is going to have to be held accountable. And once the cleanup starts to happen and all of the bodies start coming out and a genuine count is made for each and every single person that was killed, I just don't see Netanyahu getting the good grace to be an honorable person. I just don't see a sociopath getting that sort of inspiration to do anything unless there was some kind of personal profit in it for him. The reality is this 20-point plan does not offer a path to statehood, as is the vote of 157 different countries around the world. The the fact is this: this has been an illegal occupation since the signing of the Balfour Agreement in the 1920s, and the colonization has been happening ever since. And once the Holocaust broke out in 1933, and also with the Havara Agreement, there is far too much that has gone on historically for this to be a smooth transition. I also half expect Netanyahu to find any reason he can to continue the assault on Gaza, because again, I do not see this individual willingly being held accountable for his crimes against humanity, no more than I see Trump or Biden doing the same thing.
I don't think it matters whether or not Netanyahu is personally held accountable, because whoever they pick to replace him is just going to do the same thing. It's the genocide of the Palestinians is systemic, and it is built into the very structure of the Israeli state. Israel cannot exist without the genocide of the Palestinians. This has been known since probably 1880s, but it's definitely been known to us. It's been known to the Palestinians since 1948. That's what the Nakba was all about. So
it's been known to Jabotinsky and the Israelis since like the 1930s, again, if not earlier.
Yeah. It was always the plan.
Yeah, they were like, we need to make an iron wall of swords, they said.
Yeah.
This is why it's actually imperative for Netanyahu to be held accountable, so that way anybody who would follow in his footsteps knows exactly what their future is if they do not.
Unless they decide to use him to, like Germany did, use him to wash themselves of the genocide. Okay. Yeah, they get to, well, he's gone, we're clean.
We're good. Fake denazification.
Yeah.
Yeah, maintain the structure.
At the end of the day, the UN did pass a resolution that said that Israel needs to vacate. The land is not theirs. They have been ordered off of it. So now, with a ceasefire in place against Gaza, if they don't leave, they maintain their illegal occupation of Palestine, which increases the likelihood of there needing to be military action against Israel to enforce international law.
Yeah, but I mean, international law isn't a real thing anyway, and the UN is not a reliable organization in order to secure human rights. We know this from Palestine anyway. They're the only country in the world that stepped up to defend Palestine militarily was Yemen. The only one. And no shade to Iran. Iran's situation is complicated.
They had issues.
Yeah, Iran's situation is complicated. And I don't want to be smearing Iran with that statement. But they're the only one. And I think that the terms of the agreement and the terms of the ceasefire here are a decent amount of them are favoring Hamas's goals. And I think that goes directly towards the armed struggle, obviously. And that does show that the Palestinian resistance has won in some places. But the fact that it's not over is proof that the Palestinian resistance was sold out, if not betrayed, by the countries that it nominally should have expected to stand up for it. And of course, by the UN and the world at large. Saudi Arabia did nothing. Qatar did nothing. The UAE did worse than nothing. Both them and Saudi Arabia attacked Yemen. Jordan straight up runs cover fire for Israel. Syria had its own problems again. Like I'm not going to diss Syria on that. They were occupied. We'll say, we'll joke. Syria was occupied. Lebanon, Hezbollah, of course, did their part, and they paid dearly for it. Hassan Nasrallah and Yahya Sinwar paid the last full measure for Palestinian liberation. And like Sinwar said, Israel was defeated on October 7th. That was the end. That was the end of it. And now who they were left fighting is the United States and the United Kingdom. Libya, of course, was destroyed in 2011 in order to prevent them from being able to participate. Morocco, Tunisia sold out Palestine. Egypt sold out Palestine. Iraq also occupied, but the Iraqis did a lot of the Iraqi organizations did their part within the best of their ability, of course. But the world sold out Palestine, and I have no reason to believe they won't do it again.
Yeah, just to get back to the report, of all people, Marco Rubio, who is such a colossal piece of fuck, but he was necessarily quoted, I think at least twice or three times in that report, just going back and forth. So he says, on the one hand, he says something that's like, on the surface of it legitimate. He's like, hey, Israel, we can't have a peace deal while you're bombing like Gaza, like you need to cut that out. Then on the other hand, he said something that was pretty like sinister. And I think we should all pick up on it. He said, we're dealing with barbarians. So he said this, he said, while we're gonna work toward a peace deal, we have to be ready to understand that like that might not work out. So he's already kind of like rhetorically, the US Secretary of State is like rhetorically like setting the stage for this like infinite war against barbarians. On the one hand, we also have a huge, I think, maybe not bombshell is the right word, but just like an incredibly important comment from the Wall Street Journal when it said, Israel is worried about losing its ability to intervene in Gaza. That's like, that kind of says it all right there. Mm-hmm. Israel wants to keep its ability to mow the lawn. It wants to keep its ability to slaughter Palestinians. And there are already indications that it's, kind of like you said, like, shouldn't celebrate this. It's setting up precedents to potentially say like, well, like maybe Hamas hasn't completely, disarmed itself. And there's again another report in the Wall Street Journal that we didn't see there where it said, there are people who identify as Hamas that might not be centrally controlled by Hamas that like their family was just killed. Like they're not going to want to let down their rifles, which honestly in the grand scheme of things, like, but it gets to a deeper point, which is like rhetorically, like the fucking Piers Morgans of the world are always saying things like, he's like, do you believe that like, Israel should, Hamas should have any part in like governing a coalition? And the idea that like Hamas has been discredited by October 7th, so it doesn't get to have any kind of say in the Palestinian struggle for liberation is so fucking stupid. Because even by that same logic, it's like, okay, so if someone carries out an act of terror or violence, they are discredited from participating in governance. Then like Israel has been discredited for decades, and they have absolutely no right. So if by that logic, one side needs to disarm, it's clearly Israel, the secret nuclear fucking terrorist power that literally stole nuclear secrets from us in an insane, like, Iran conspiracy theory of the conservatives, but it actually happened level operation. You know what I mean? So here we are, 2 years on, a very fragile kind of bullshit peace deal. I have, I'm seeing Palestinian friends celebrate, in various forums, and I don't want to I don't think it's right to say like you're wrong for celebrating the reports of Palestinians in Gaza, like, celebrating. Some Palestinians said that in January 2025, they felt like that was the peak, that was the most free that Palestine has ever been in January 2025. And like, I'm not going to say that their subjectivity is false, so like, I get that.
The bombs have stopped, but the war's not over, and it's okay to cheer that the bombs have stopped.
And it's okay to cheer that the bombs have stopped, and I want to cheer with them. But I also want to keep watching to see what happens.
Absolutely. It's ever my recommendation to the Palestinian people to not disarm. There's a saying from a while ago. I can't remember the exact details of it, but it goes along the lines of, if I'm holding a gun and you're holding a gun, we are equals, and we can talk about the truth. If you're holding a gun and I'm not holding a gun, the truth is in your hands. And right now, with everything that has happened to the Palestinian people since the Nakba, if they were to fully disarm, that gives Israel the green light to finish the job, and that is what I oppose.
And it's why the Palestinian resistance has not disarmed and has not allowed disarmament to really be on the table since the 1980s. Because when the Palestinian resistance disarmed in Lebanon in, I want to say 83? I don't remember. But in the 1980s, that's where we get the Sabra and Shatila massacre. The Palestinians disarmed, and immediately Israel and allies committed an act of genocide against Palestinian civilians. Just wiped them out. We know, and unarmed people are slaves or are subject to slavery at any given moment. And the Palestinians know this well. And I don't think they should put down their arms. I don't think they should have to. Like you said, obviously Israel is one who needs to disarm.
Yeah. Nuclear and firepower, all of it, gone, washed away.
Absolutely.
They have earned that punishment.
Yeah. For sure.
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine.
Thank you for joining us this week with The People's Report, hosted by Solidarity TV. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us at solidaritytv.org. Organizing the working classes of the world in solidarity forever.